Well, good evening, and welcome to St. Michael Lutheran on this beautiful Good Friday evening. It's great to have you here with us in worship tonight, those joining us in the sanctuary, as well as those tuning in from home via live stream on this very holy and this very special night where we remember how much God loved us, so much that He sent His only Son into this world to take our place on the cross and the difference that makes for our lives now and for eternity. So we truly look forward to experiencing all that God has in store for us this evening in worship. A couple announcements as we make our start. Just a reminder that we do have our normal Sunday worship, Easter worship this coming weekend. Services at 5:30 on Saturday, 9 and 11 on Sunday. Being Easter weekend, we'll have Holy Communion at all three of the services. So we look forward to having you with us and inviting friends and family to join us as well to celebrate the good news that the tomb is indeed empty. Also, to that end, we have an Easter breakfast on Sunday morning from 8:30 to 11 in the gym. So it's a wonderful, wonderful fellowship opportunity on Easter morning. And then finally, you should have received 2 slips of paper from the usher as you came in today. One of the slips, the smaller white slip, the blank slip, is something that we've done many years here on Good Friday at St. Michael. During the course of the service, if there is a particular sin, an area of concern, something that's on your heart this Good Friday that you would like to write down, and as we leave the sanctuary this evening in silence, you'll have the opportunity to take that concern or concerns, that sin, that troublesome matter, that you can turn over to Jesus, that Jesus has paid for on the cross, and you can place it on one of the nails of the cross. So we invite you to do that. Also, the other slip of paper you would have received would have been a praise report and prayer request. If you do have a prayer need, if you have a praise report you'd like to jot down and have this slip of paper prayed over during our prayer vigil, which will take place here tonight at 8 o'clock into 1 a.m. this morning, feel free to fill out that slip of paper, place it in a basket in the narthex lobby, and if you'd like to stay and join us for any of those hours coming up to be a part of that prayer vigil, of course, you're welcome to join us. But with that, we're here to worship the Lord on this Good Friday, and let's prepare our hearts by checking out our Good Friday video.
Please stand.
seated. The death of Jesus can have a sobering effect on your thinking. When you focus on the cross, all else seems to fade into the background. Jesus' sacrifice was profound, it was real, it was gritty, and meaningful. So tonight, we will focus on the cross. And we are going to use some expert opinions on what transpired as Jesus was being crucified. I'm going to warn you in advance that some of that expert opinions will be graphic. We're going to relive Jesus' last moments, his last words, what they might mean to us, and allow all of that to reorient our vision, our thinking, our way of seeing. Well, Jesus began the crucifixion in rough shape. He would have been in excellent physical condition prior to these events because Jesus grew up as a carpenter, which means that he would have been engaged in physical labor. And he and his disciples walked everywhere they went. His stamina and strength were likely very well developed, which demonstrates how much he endured to wind up in the condition that he was in as we meet him on the cross. The night before he was crucified, Scripture tells us that Jesus was so distressed while struggling over what it was that was to come as he prayed with the Father that he sweat drops of blood. And when we read those words, we can think, this surely has got to be just a figure of speech. I mean, who sweats drops of blood? But actually, there's a rare medical condition called hematohydrosis, during which the capillary blood vessels that feed the sweat glands actually break down. And the blood released from the vessels mixes with sweat, causing one to sweat drops of blood. This condition is experienced as a result of mental anguish and high anxiety, the very state that we see Jesus in as he prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. Once arrested, Jesus walks approximately 2.5 miles between his trials before Pilate and Herod. He has not slept, and he has already been mocked and beaten. His skin would remain tender from his hematohydrosis. His physical condition worsens. Pilate then ordered Jesus to be flogged, as required by Roman law before one is crucified. Typically, the accused stood naked when they were flogged, and the flogging itself covered the areas from one's shoulders down to the top of their legs. The whip consisted of several strips of leather, and in the middle of the strips were little metal balls that caused deep bruising in the back of the one whipped. And at the end of each strip was attached a piece of sheep bone. And each time this whip, that was called the cat of nine tails because there were 9 strands, makes contact with Jesus' skin, it digs deep into his muscles, tearing out chunks of flesh and exposing bone underneath. The flogging leaves the flesh on Jesus' back in ribbons. By this point, Jesus has lost already a lot of blood, causing his blood pressure to fall and putting him into shock. Already, his thirst is intense as his body craves moisture to replace the blood loss. Roman soldiers place a crown of thorns on his head and a robe on his now shredded back, and they mock him. The robe momentarily clots the blood on his back. And as the soldiers hit Jesus on the head with a crown of thorns there on his head, the thorns dig deep into his skull, causing blood to run down his face and neck. The thorns also cause damage to the nerve that runs to his face, causing intense pain down his face and neck. The soldiers spit on Jesus, rip the robe off his back, and the bleeding starts anew. Jesus' condition becomes critical, and he is not yet nailed to the cross.
2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, They crucified him there along with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. Now the people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him, and they said, "He saved others, let him save himself if he's God's Messiah, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you're the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was written a notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews."
Crucifixion was invented by the Persians between 300 and 400 BC. And it's possibly the most painful death ever invented by humankind. The English language derives the word excruciating from the word crucifixion, demonstrating the kind of suffering that it involved. It's a death that Jesus faces as he now hangs on a busy road with many travelers on it for the Passover, passing by outside Jerusalem, and he's hung between two thieves. Archaeologists have uncovered recently the remains of a man who they say was crucified, and they know that he was crucified because of this nail that is still lodged into the upper part of his foot. And what it demonstrated was that while many times we picture a crucified man with his feet one on top of the other on the front of the cross, it demonstrated that instead the crucified man would have his feet on the sides of the cross like this, with the nail going through the upper part of his foot, the ankle area, so that he could push himself up on that nail to be able to catch a breath. And now it's Jesus who chooses to push himself up on those nails that have bound his feet to that cross, to speak his very first words from the cross. And what would those words be that he chooses to speak, that he goes through so much labor to be able to produce? After all this suffering that he has already endured, what would Jesus say with his first words from the cross? He says these words, "Father, forgive them, because they don't know what they're doing."
So that
one of the criminals who hung there, hurled insults at Jesus. "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God," he said, "since you are under the same sentence? We're punished justly, for we're getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered him, "I tell you the truth, today you will be with me in paradise." At this point, Jesus is thrown to the ground, reopening his wounds as they roughly stretch his arms out on the crossbeam, where 9-inch nails are driven through his wrists, damaging the major nerve of the hand on impact, causing agonizing pain up both Jesus' arms. The wrist in those days was considered to be part of the hand, and the nails are driven through them in order to securely fasten his upper body to the cross. That crossbeam, which is what Jesus is nailed to now, is then raised and dropped into the vertical beam, which is left in place between crucifixions. Wood was scarce, and they had to reuse it. Above each crucified man was posted a sign of the charge against him, the reason why he is being crucified. So the sign above Jesus reads, "King of the Jews." The Jewish leaders objected. They didn't want Jesus to be their king, but someone did. One of the other men crucified with Jesus, a thief, it is said, raised himself up to draw in a very precious breath, to speak the words, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." To which Jesus replied, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Paradise. How wonderful that sounds in contrast to the horrors of Golgotha. The image of the Garden of Eden, peace and purity before sin came into the world. Jesus was confident of the joy that was to come, the joy that would be shared by people such as this thief because of faith in Jesus as the King. Let's join together now as we sing the hymn, "The Old Rugged Cross." We're going to remain seated as we sing this hymn.
Jesus
Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son." And to his disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, the disciple took her home into his home.
The primary problem the crucified man faces is how he might draw the next breath. Crucifixion involves a slow form of suffocation. Carbon dioxide builds up in the blood, resulting in a high level of carbonic acid in the bloodstream. The body responds instinctively, triggering the desire to breathe. At the same time, the heart beats faster to circulate available oxygen. The decreased oxygen causes damage to the tissues and the capillaries and begin leaking watery fluid from the blood into the tissues. This results in a buildup of fluid around the heart and lungs. The collapsing lungs, failing heart, dehydration, and the inability to get sufficient oxygen to the tissues essentially suffocate the victim. And now, his mother, the woman who stands there hearing his cries, is the one who first heard his cries as he breathed in the air as an infant on that starlit Bethlehem night. Now she stands weeping at the foot of Jesus' cross. She felt helpless there, looking up at him, and the tears flowed. Her tears made Jesus want to reach his arms around her to comfort her. But his arms were pinned to the cross. So in his moment of need, seeing the need of this woman he loved and cared for, Jesus prepared to speak yet again. Mary was already a widow by this point. Joseph had died some time before. Sons were there to care for their mothers, especially the oldest son. Jesus sensed that need. So Jesus pushed up to gain the air that he needed to be able to speak once again. And he said to her these words, "Dear woman, here is your son," referring to the only disciple who did not flee, the only disciple who did not abandon him, John, his disciple, who was standing next to her. And to John he said, "Here is your mother." Jesus loved to the end, in this case by entrusting the mother he loved to the disciple he loved. Years later, after John the disciple moved to the city of Ephesus to pastor the church there in Ephesus, he brought Mary with him, so that after John and Mary both died, the people of Ephesus, the believers in Ephesus, still remembered fondly how Mary lived there in Ephesus with John and cared for her as Jesus instructed.
Later, knowing that everything had now been finished, and so that Scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." A jar of wine vinegar was there. So they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of a hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips.
The body, it is said, is 60% water. And Jesus had now lost far too much of that precious fluid through blood loss, and he was desperately thirsty. A common sound after a battle is the cry of the wounded for water. And now Jesus cries out, "I am thirsty." So one soldier who's standing guard duty there gets an evil grin on his face as an idea comes to his mind. He laughs, elbows his companion so that he might have an audience about all that he was about to do. The soldier walks the few steps to the latrine bucket in which a sponge lay that was used for the soldiers' toilet paper. Even the soldiers have to have a place where they could relieve themselves during the long hours of guard duty at crucifixions. Well, the soldier grabs the sponge out of the bucket with a stick, pours cheap wine on it, and laughingly presses that foul concoction into Jesus' face, humiliating him in his hour of need. Not too long before, not too many years before, Jesus sat with a woman by a well in Samaria, telling her that he could bring her living water. By drinking deeply of Jesus, by drinking his life into hers, her life was changed that day. The thirst in her soul was quenched, and so can yours be. That thirst for something more, something real, something meaningful and lasting. He's the one who satisfies that thirst, who now himself is thirsty because of his loss of blood for you, fulfilling the prophecy spoken about him and this event generations before they even occurred, in the words of Psalm 22, as we see that now. While that gives us the end of Psalm 22, what's important is the beginning of Psalm 22. So I'm going to read that for you, okay? And it reads this way: my God, why have you forsaken me? Far from my deliverance are the words of my groaning. Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I have no rest. Yet you are holy. O you who are enthroned upon the praises of Israel, in you our fathers trusted, they trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried out and were delivered. In you they trusted and were not disappointed. But I am a worm and not a man, a reproach of men and despised by the people. All who see me sneer at me, they separate with the lip, they wag the head, saying, commit yourself to the Lord, let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, because he delights in him. Yet you are he who brought me forth from the womb. You made me trust when upon my mother's breast. Upon you I was cast from birth. You have been my God from my mother's womb. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, for there is none to help. Many bulls have surrounded me. Strong bulls of Bashan have encircled me. They open wide their mouths at me as a ravening and roaring lion. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, it is melted within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue cleaves to my jaws, and you lay me in the dust of death. For dogs have surrounded me. A band of evildoers has encompassed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They look, they stare at me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. But you, O Lord, be not far off. O you, my help, hasten to my assistance. And then we continue on with our gospel narrative. At the 6th hour, darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some of those standing near heard this. They said, listen, he's calling Elijah. Now, it should come as no surprise that even in death, Jesus is misunderstood, since he was often misunderstood in life, and he is misunderstood today. But Jesus spoke these words so that, if for no other reason, we might look to the Scriptures, look to the prophecies, look to Psalm 22 that I just read, which also begins with those words, to see who it is who's dying before us. He's the fulfillment of prophecy. The Scriptures talked in great detail about this moment. Generations before it occurred, they were giving an eyewitness account of Jesus dying on the cross. But this is also a very lonely place. A very lonely place. Jesus was forsaken. The disciples fled. He was betrayed by the one who sat beside him at dinner the night before. And he now bore the sin of humanity, which must separate him from the Father. He had to feel terribly alone, abandoned. When you feel abandoned, when you feel alone, know that Jesus has been to that place before you. Don't misunderstand him. He knows. He sees. So Jesus raises himself up to shout those words that began Psalm 22 by saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?
Stillness filled the heavens on crucifixion day. Some say it rained, I don't know if it's true. Well, I can just imagine 10,000 angels cry. That would seem like rain to me and you. The angels all stood ready to take him from the tree. They waited for the words from his voice. And when he thou forsaken me, they watched the Savior die of his own choice. watched the Savior die, God turned his head away. He could not bear the sight. It must have looked like rain when 10,000 angels cried. It must have looked like rain when 10,000 angels cried.
A jar of wine vinegar was there. So they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he had received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Jesus was sent into this world like a soldier to do battle with sin and death and the evil one. In the military, they have all kinds of code names that they understand, but a lot of us don't. But one of those names, rather, is Charlie Mike. It means continue the mission. And when they're facing impossible odds and wonder if maybe retreat might be the best option to pursue, they might hear over the radio those words, Charlie Mike, continue the mission. Don't give up. Keep your eyes on the prize. Jesus was not just tempted by Satan in the wilderness. He was tempted there, but he was also tempted many times after that to abandon the mission. He was continually tempted. In the garden, on the night he was betrayed, he was again tempted to give it all up, but he didn't. On his knees, he prayed and sweat those drops of blood, praying, "Not my will, Father, but yours be done." Charlie Mike, continue the mission. And what was that mission? To go through all he was going through now for you. For you. To be that intermediary between you and the Father. To broker a new relationship for you so that you might live. Really live. And now, mission accomplished. It is finished. Nothing more needed. It's complete. One last breath exhaled from Jesus' lungs, and there was no more. It was finished. It was now about the 6th hour, and darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour. For the sun stopped shining, and the curtain in the temple was torn in two. Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." When he had said this, he breathed his last. Those words come from the Gospel of Luke, and Luke identifies different words than John as Jesus' final words. Each one lifted up what they thought was to be most important. And for Luke, what was most important was when Jesus trusted his Father with his spirit, with his very life. Jesus modeled what he hopes for you to pursue, for you to follow, showing that if he can trust his Father with his spirit in light of all of these things that he had faced, then so can you. So trust him. Into your hands, Father. I commit my spirit. I commit my life. I commit my relationships. I commit my hopes. I commit my dreams. I commit my tomorrows. I commit my today. I commit my past. Into your hands. I commit my spirit. The decreased oxygen in Jesus' body as he hung on that cross could damage the heart itself, which leads to cardiac arrest. The heart can even burst, a process known as cardiac rupture. Jesus most likely died of a heart attack. After Jesus' death, the soldiers go around and break the legs of each of the two thieves who are hanging next to him to cause suffocation. Death comes quickly. They can no longer lift themselves up on those nails to breathe. But when they come to Jesus, they discover that he's already dead. So there was no need to break his legs. Instead, being the thorough executioners that they are, one of them takes a spear and drives it deep into Jesus' side. So deep into his side that John reports that blood and water come out, referring to the watery fluids surrounding the heart and the lungs, indicating how deep that spear was driven into Jesus' lifeless, limp body. So what was the meaning of all of this? Was it all in vain? Not if it has changed you. Looking on the cross can be sobering to your thinking, but that's the purpose. As Paul said, it's to be transformed by the renewing of your mind, a mind fixed on Jesus, fixed on the cross, so that you might live a new life for him.
I think I heard him say when he was struggling up the hill, I think I heard him say, take my mother home. I'll die so easy. Take my mother home. I think I heard him say when they were raffling off his clothes, I think I heard him say, take my mother home. I'll die so easy. Take my mother home. I think I heard him cry when they were nailing in them nails. I think I heard him cry, take my mother home. I'll die this death on Calvary, ain't gonna die no more. Please take my mother home. I think I heard him say when he was dying on that cross, I think I heard him say, take my mother home. I think I heard him say when he was given up the ghost, I think I heard him say, take